another crash course in music history. Let's just dive right into it. We're looking at instrumental music in the classical era. So, one of the first things we should point out here is this is the point where the piano finally exceeds the harpsichord in terms of popularity. Now, remember we talked last time about how piano, the way it works is you have felt hammers that strike a string, boom, and then that string vibrates and that allows the sound to resonate. And how heavily you press the keys and how hard that hammer strikes the string determines how loud it's going to be. You can also shift the keys so that not all 3 strings for each note are played to soften it up as well. A harpsichord, on the other hand, you don't have that control over the volume. And the reason is because, again, you've got a little leather plectrum that rises up and down on a jack and flicks the string, basically. You can't really control how hard that flick is. So, this is where the name for the piano actually comes from its ability to change its volume. Piano, of course, as you all know, is Italian for soft. And the full name of the piano is pianoforte, which of course forte is Italian for loud. So this name, pianoforte, which we just abbreviate as piano, is the name given to it because of its ability to change its volume. The piano was invented in Florence, Italy in 1700. And again, it developed its popularity over time to the point where by the time we're deep into the classical era, it has superseded the harpsichord as the most popular keyboard instrument to play. Also during this time, you have the development of string quartets. So you're seeing more music written for string quartets. The 2 images that you see on the screen here, one is the oldest surviving piano we have. And it's a little bit smaller than a current piano. It's got only 54 keys instead of 88. And modern scholars, to help us distinguish between the 17th century pianos and later 18th century pianos, 18th century pianos and later 19th century pianos, they call these earlier pianos forte pianos instead of pianofortes, because this was their brilliant way of distinguishing them as far as size goes. So just pianoforte, it's a piano. Don't worry about that. The bottom image is a table from the late 1700s. You can see the top is taken off of it, and it's got 4 stands. It was designed for string quartet players to gather around and play with each other. The other thing that we should mention during the classical era that's important, in 1710, the clarinet was introduced, and by the end of the century, it was considered a standard woodwind instrument, right along with the oboe, bassoon, and flute. It should be mentioned, though, that during this era, only flutes were played by amateurs. All the rest were only played by professionals. So you didn't have just your casual clarinet players at home like you do today. Another thing that we should mention is orchestras around this time usually had only around 25 players, which we're going to see later in the Romantic era was expanded quite a bit. All right, let's go on. Now, there was a huge shift during the classical era towards music in more major keys versus the minor keys that we heard a lot of in the Baroque era. There was a lot of shifting towards major keys during this era. The symphony was developed. Now, the symphony in this case refers to the form of the music. This is a term I want you to know, musical form. Form refers to structure or how the music is laid out. In a symphony, its form is very much like Vivaldi's Seasons. It's like an orchestral concerto. You have a fast movement, a slow movement, and a fast movement. And later there was sometimes a 4th dance movement added as well. Other types of forms would be like a binary form, where there's an A section that has 1 theme, or it maybe has 2 themes, and then a B section that has 1 or 2 themes that are different. And then you'll hear scholars talk about musical form. Well, this is ABA. That's an A section, a B section, and then A again, just like the beginning. Or you'll hear rondo forms, which are like ABACA, an abacá form, or abacaba, ABACABA, which is just basically different types of movements that have an A section that repeats over and over. Binary is the term that we give to something that is A and B. And there's different forms of binary, which we're not going to get into right now. The other important form that develops during this time is the sonata form, and this is a much more elaborate form. Initially, it was thought of as a two-part form, like a fancy A and a fancy B, and then later it was viewed as a three-part form, which we're going to see. Again, sonata refers to the type or the form. So when you hear composers name their music sonata in this and that, or symphony number whatever, it refers to the form or the structure, how the music's laid out. So again, form is the musical structure or the layout. Sonata form, you can see kind of a diagram of what it looks like there. You have what's called the exposition. That's the first part, and it introduces a theme in whatever the key is. And then it modulates into a second theme that's in the dominant. This is the key that is 5 steps above the original. So you start here, you move up to A, and now we're working in the dominant key. And then you close that off and you go into the middle section. This is what's called the development. You take bits and pieces from the exposition and you mess around with them a little bit. Then you go into what's called the recapitulation. This is just like the beginning. You do theme 1 in the dominant key, but then instead of moving up, we stay in the original key and do theme 2, and then there's some kind of closing. There may be what's called a coda, which is literally the tail or the end. So you're not going to need to know how all of that works and how that's laid out, but I'd like you to see if you can listen for it in some music that we're going to be listening to. So let's talk about some composers from this era. We're going to get to 2 of our biggest composers tomorrow, but I want to start with a few others for today, so you have some composers you can start picking from for your classical era piece. First is Domenico Scarlatti, who was a keyboard composer. He was born and educated in Italy, but he later went on to serve the King of Portugal, and then when the king's daughter married the prince from Spain, he followed her over and served the Spanish monarchy. Now, Scarlatti wrote, among his many compositions, over 555 sonatas. And remember, those are the exposition with theme 1 and theme 2, development with bits and pieces, and then recapitulation with theme 1 and theme 2, but no modulation in the key. So, what I'd like you to do, I want you to listen to a little bit of one of his sonatas he wrote. Now, his style wasn't considered what's called galant. That was the modern style with those phrases that we talked about, the periodicity. We go along, then we go along again, then we close off. It doesn't have that kind of sense. It's more like Baroque music in the way it just kind of keeps flowing and going and going. And it doesn't have like a real singable melody. However, what he was noted for was how he wrote his music. It was written in a very distinct style that had some really different ways of playing keyboards than what we'd seen before. You're going to hear some thick chords that kind of resemble Spanish guitar, which, remember, this guy spent most of his life working in Spain, so it's not surprising he was inspired by that. But you're going to hear these thick chords that sound like they're being strummed out by a guitar, but they're being played by the piano. So what I'd like you to do is listen to Scarlatti's Sonata in D major, K119 is the identification number. And I want you to notice how it opens on a D major chord, and then if you pay attention and you look to where the exposition ends, which is at measure 93, and then it repeats back and does the exposition a second time, you're going to see that it goes from D and it ends on A. So we're now, and you'll feel we're in A major, but then it goes back to doing the theme again in D. Then you're going to move on and you're going to listen to the development and the recapitulation are all kind of considered the second movement. The development really barely exists at all. It floats around a little bit doing its thing, and then you're going to hear that we're doing the recapitulation all in D. And it ends on D. There's not a lot of crazy accidentals other than that brief little development in the middle. So I want you to at least listen through the exposition section. I want you to listen to how we start in D, end on A, and then repeat back, and we do it again. We do the theme in D, then we do the second theme in A, and then it goes on to the development. So I'd like you to at least listen. It's only a 5.5-minute sonata, but at least listen through the exposition and hear how that works. And then we're going to go on to a couple other composers from the classical era. All right, so as you remember, Bach had a lot of kids, around 20 children. Not all of them survived, but he had a lot of kids, and 2 of his sons did turn out to be very well-known composers and musicians in their own right. The first is Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, which we often just refer to as CPE Bach. And then you have Johann Christian Bach, who is the youngest of his children, and he's often known as the London Bach. CPE worked in Germany, while Johann worked in Italy and then spent most of his life in London, hence why he's known as the London Bach. What I do want you to listen to is another sonata, and I want you to see if you can listen for that form. This is by CPE Bach. It's his sonata in A major, H186, movement 2. I want you to follow along and note where the exposition ends. So again, we start in our original key, we modulate up 5 steps, and the exposition will end that way. Then you go into the development. I want you to at least listen through and see if you can hear where that exposition ends and the development begins. In fact, if you'd like, I'd encourage you to listen through the whole thing and see if you can detect where all the changes in the structure are, where the form is, where does the exposition end, where does the development begin, where does the recapitulation begin. If you really want to stretch yourself, then I would also encourage you, this is optional listening, but I'd encourage you to listen to J.C. Bach's first movement of his concerto for piano, Opus 7, number 5. This is sonata style also, but it's a concerto, so it features a solo instrument, in this case the piano, and it's also in ritornello form. You remember ritornello means return in Italian? So what this means, and I've got it all mapped out there on the side, so if you want to see if you can listen to it, you've got a ritornello in the beginning with the orchestra, and they do a theme and a transition and a second theme and a closing theme. Then the solo instrument comes in, the piano, and this is where the true exposition begins. They do theme 1, they modulate up, and it's in the original key. Then they modulate up to the dominant with the second theme, and they close in that. Then there's a little ritornello, which is a little bit of what the orchestra played at the beginning. There's a little bit of that they played. Then the soloist comes back in and they do the development. They modulate all over the place, which means to change keys. Then another little ritornello, another little part of what the orchestra played at the beginning. Then the soloist comes back in, and this means that they're going to now do, the recapitulation. They do theme 1 in the dominant, or in the major key, the tonic key. They transition, and then they do the second theme, but they do it in the tonic key. They don't move up to the dominant. They don't move up to step 5. So, and then they close like that. Then there's a cadenza, which is this very fanciful run, and then there's another ritornello, and it's done. So if you think you can catch where all those transitions are, feel free to listen to that, but that's optional listening. Again, though, what I do want you to listen to is CPE's sonata, and I want you to listen to where the exposition ends and the development begins. Side note, you're going to hear this little bouncy rhythmic structure that he uses, and it's called a Scotch snap. This is where you've got a short, long, short, long. So it's going to sound, you're going to hear at the beginning something that kind of sounds a little bit like this. So it's going to be, and that should have been a G sharp. So that's a Scotch snap. Da-da, da-da. That's what's called a Scotch snap. So you can listen for that as well, so you have something else that you can show off with your musical knowledge when you're listening to classical music. All right, enjoy these listening excerpts. Again, listen right now to the composition by CPE and listen for the exposition. And then tomorrow we're going to tackle some of the most well-known composers of the classical era. So enjoy!